Okay, well, I know folks are still coming in, but why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you all for joining us after lunch. We are here to talk about the current status and the future promise of CCS and carbon removal. Obviously, a crucially important topic in terms of one of the sets of technologies that we're going to need to see deployed in the near term to deal with the challenges of climate change. I want to maybe first just do a brief introduction of the panel and then provide a little context and set up this discussion. So today we're joined by Nora Cohen, who's head of market development and policy at Charm Industrial. Charm is a carbon removal company based in San Francisco. Michael Dreibelbis, who's a counsel at Latham and Watkins in Los Angeles and has worked extensively on the topic, and Takashi Hongo, who's a senior fellow at Mitsui and Co. Global Strategic Studies Institute and works on game-changing climate and energy technologies. I'm Virgil Welch. I'm a partner at Caliber Strategies, a energy and climate consulting firm in California, and I also am the director of the California Carbon Solutions Coalition, which is a business and labor organization that works in California to deploy carbon reducing technologies to support achievement of California's climate goals. So I want to just, as I said, maybe a little context here. There's been an awful lot of positive developments in this space in the last number of years. We've got incentives embedded in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Bill, 45Q. We have policies in states like California that are supporting the economics and the deployment of carbon removal and carbon capture technologies. But clearly we need more, both in terms of the deployment of these technologies. We need to move more quickly. We face some challenges in the space of project deployment and financing and permitting, among other things. And what I'm hoping we can do is not so much focus on the barriers, but I think it is important to at least talk about those, but really kind of have a conversation about, okay, acknowledging that all of the leading assessments have articulated a need for carbon removal and carbon capture in order to meet our global climate goals, our state climate goals. What do we actually need to be doing to get these projects going at the scale that we're going to need to have them in the relatively near term? So that's the conversation, and I hope that at the end we'll have some time for all of you who have questions to please feel free to engage with the experts on the panel today. So again, with that, let's dive in. And Nora, if it's okay, I think I might start with you. You get home team advantage since you're based here in San Francisco. But I believe Charm has actually provided more carbon removal to date than any other company, which is obviously a start. It's not where we need to get, but it's a great start. So maybe you could start by telling us just a little bit about Charm and what has enabled that early success thus far as you're moving towards obviously building on it.
Thanks so much, Virgil, and thanks to NACW for hosting us, and excited to be in conversation with these panelists today. So as Virgil said, I'm Nora Cohen, and I lead policy at Charm Industrial. And I'll give you a little bit of, okay, what do we actually do at Charm, and how is it that we've removed more than 7,000 tons permanently of carbon removal? So we are a carbon removal company based here in San Francisco, and the way that we remove carbon is that we use biomass residues. So either wildfire thinnings that would otherwise burn, or we use agricultural residues that would also either rot or burn on the field. So basically biomass that doesn't have another market. We take those feedstocks, we put them through a fast pyrolysis process, which basically means we liquefy them by heating them with little to no oxygen. That produces a very carbon-rich oil. It is called bio-oil. It has a high water content, so it's not well suited for fuel. It smells very strongly of barbecue sauce, and it has a lot of embodied carbon within it. And then when we take that oil and then we store it in either idle or orphaned wells. So we can reuse existing infrastructure that's at end of life to store carbon. And then what we do with that, once we store that carbon, is that we sell it on the voluntary carbon removal market, because the bio-oil itself actually solidifies in the subsurface, and so it's a very, very permanent form of carbon removal. The other thing that's unique about our process is that we have small mobile units, which means that we can actually go and work in forests or near forests, and similarly on the field eventually. We're still getting to the point of deploying at scale in the field, but the point is that the form factor is made so that we can actually go to the biomass, which helps with the costs around biomass transportation and the logistics of getting the biomass from forests to a central location. And then the second half of that question was around how is it that we've been scaling so quickly? So pyrolysis is not new. Using feedstocks for this kind of thing isn't new. There's a lot of, many decades of experience around injecting and oil and gas. Like what we do is very similar to like saline injection. So we basically are able to scale quickly because we've taken several processes that exist and strung them together to create this new product. And it's also something where the value of, there's a lot of efforts to use this type of oil, in the past to create fuels, but because there's so much water in it, it is really hard to refine. We were basically able to get a higher value in the carbon market by using it as to store the carbon permanently in the oil. And so that's what's enabled us to kind of take these different disparate processes, put them together. And then because we have small units, it means that we're able to iterate very quickly and continue to improve the technology in order to scale quickly and already put technology in the field, even as we're iterating it towards the end state.
Wonderful, thank you. Mike, maybe we'll go to you next. As I mentioned, you've done a lot of work with companies who are in the development and deployment stages, and I wonder if you could just talk about that from your perspective. As I said, not necessarily focusing just on the barriers and challenges, but I think it's something that we certainly need to kind of be aware of as we're thinking about how do we maybe start addressing those.
Sure thing, Virgil, and thanks everyone for being here. So my practice is focused on advising and negotiating carbon credit purchase and sale agreements, offtake agreements, and as well as carbon capture sequestration agreements for transportation sequestration, offtake of CO2. So really, DAC is where those two kind of come together, although we work on all of those projects. A lot of what we're seeing is, for purposes of this carbon conference, not everyone has been as far along as CHARM, right? There's a lot of projects that are not up and running yet on the CCS side. I think the first 45Q IRA project started in North Dakota last year. They were fortunate to be in a state that had primacy, so we're able to accelerate their timelines. But most of the projects that I've worked on have been financed on the basis of 45Q and LCFS. And that's starting to change, right? As the major registries are close to coming to market with their methodologies for carbon credits, for voluntary market credits, and as we continue to await the first LCFS permanent certification for any project, I'm starting to see projects looking to carbon credits as a revenue source. And the development of DACs has only compounded that, right? Because, of course, for DACs, there is no fuel product, right? The carbon removal is the product. And so there you're seeing carbon credits as a monetization strategy. So I'll stop there for now, and maybe we can get into some more as we go. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, and then maybe you can just, I think we may get into some, at least given the fact that we are in California, a little bit of some of the more specifics as it relates to California. You mentioned the LCFS. Nora, Chalmers are obviously based here, but before we go there, Takashi, I wonder if you could just provide some perspective sort of globally in terms of what the state of the market and deployment looks like. I think you're
Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm myself from the working at the think tank, and I provide the policy and the strategic advice. And from that point of view, the CCS and the DAX, that is a very, very critically important one. So when I consider the long-term net zero scenario, so from international point of view, this is inevitably the important option. However, some countries they do not need to have this option, but globally, this is a very important option because the energy and the industrial structure are different country to country. So definitely global basis, this is important. And also the COP28, the net zero scenario are confirmed, but with conditions. The renewable capacity need to be triple, and the energy efficiency improvement need to be double. If these conditions are met, in that case, net zero will be realized. However, these two conditions, of course, the IEA provides additional 3 conditions. So all 5 conditions are met. It is very, very unlikely. So we need to prepare for the option B. So from that point of view, the negative emission is a really important option. That is my views. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. So maybe it's a little bit related to your earlier point, Mike, but I want to maybe put this out for all of you, and we can start maybe again with Nora. But the question of sort of integrity around carbon removals and emissions secured from carbon capture and removal technologies has been a critique that probably to some extent has been one of the factors that's hampered the pace, at least, at which some of these technologies have been deployed. And I would be interested in all of your perspectives on sort of what are we, the collective we, doing to sort of get at that challenge? What does the landscape look like in terms of the development of robust, MRV or accounting protocols and things of that nature, so that we can start to build the requisite sort of trust amongst the policymakers and stakeholders here that we can actually really deploy these at scale, which I think, if nothing else, one of the themes, which probably this audience doesn't necessarily need to hear, is as quickly as possible, given the fact that we've got both near term, at least in places like California, and mid-century carbon neutrality goals. But anyway, sorry to. What are we doing on MRV?
Thanks, Virgil. So from Charm's perspective, it's been really integrated into the way that we've built the business. I mean, as a climate company, our mission is to remove emissions. And so in order to make sure we're meeting that mission as a company, we need to actually make sure that we're claiming net emissions. So what that's looked like for us is an initial, kind of white paper that we worked on with Carbon Direct and eco-engineers to really look at, okay, how do we encapsulate the way that our methodology around thinking about what the boundary conditions are for our removals. And then from there, that has been expanded significantly. We have worked with our buyers on this, as well as with a lot of people in the policy ecosystem. And we now have a protocol with a company called Isometric that's a really science-driven platform around protocols. And that has already gone through public consultation and then become live within the last few months. So we're now in the process of actually verifying against that protocol. And for us, that's just really measuring every single step of the way, like any emissions associated with the feedstocks and transporting them, measuring our emissions, for the actual process, and then also the injection emissions. And I think that, in order for us to scale this industry, that credibility and trust is critical, and making sure that we're keeping a high bar to make sure that these are permanent removals, and that, that if we have a customer that's purchasing a removal, that we can prove completely and demonstrate with a paper trail exactly what went into us saying, yes, we've removed that ton. It's really critical for us. And the other thing I'll say is that we also publicly share all of that data on our website. charmindustrial.com/ledger has our actual, and then we also, the tons will be on the registry at Isometric, but you can also see like a waterfall graph for every removal we've made to date on our website.
Mike? Takashi,
Yeah,
what
I'll
would
chime
you
in.
add?
First, I'll give a quick shout out to, on the subject of MRV, Maris and Sarah and others at the registries who are doing incredible work developing new methodologies for geostorage that I think I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing projects actually register and list under, but we're already seeing customers that are incorporating those methodologies into their development strategy. So that's great. We weren't there 2 years ago, for sure. On the contracting side, the question about MRB and durability is really interesting, and so we're seeing in deals now heavily negotiated points, right? I mean, if you're thinking about how you manage your risk, right? What are the remedies for a breach? Normally you calculate replacement costs on the basis of 3 independent broker quotes. Sitting here today, you would be hard pressed to even find 3 broker quotes for any of these products, right? These are not just carbon credits; these are premium, high quality, expensive credits, right? So that's a point that is negotiated heavily in deals. Another point would be just around MRV. So buyers have been doing deals, have been trying to get out there ahead of the market and procure some of these credits, and there are very sophisticated players who have been developing their own MRV, their own approach to MRV, right? So you'll see those layered in where some buyers won't just ask for a credit issued in accordance with the applicable standard, whichever that is, but also that also meets certain additional criteria, right? Specified by the buyers. Maybe it has to do with power usage at a DAC or something like that. And so then you as a lawyer, you get into questions of, well, what happens if you have a registry credit that's produced and issued but doesn't meet those additional criteria? You have a valuable credit. What are the consequences under the agreement? What are the buyer's goals? Does it fit with their overall strategy for how they're positioning, for investors from an ESG standpoint, what they're doing at the project? So those are just a few of the sort of unique challenges in this market that we're dealing with on MRV for DAC credits in particular.
So I was going to ask you this question, Takashi, but I think it's relevant maybe to ask everyone as well. I don't know if you have any perspective on the MRV issue, but if so, please go ahead. Yeah.
So about the integrity, I think that not only the MRV, but also sustainability. That is important because the negative view to the CCS and this kind of option is no need to have a fossil fuel. That is one of the options. So these people think about criticize the sustainability. So how to elaborate the CCS or DAX or these options are necessary to demonstrate that is important. Also, the people who live nearby the site, particularly the sequestration area, so they feel unhappy because this technology is quite new and they are not familiar with this one and some kind of strange feelings they have. So sustainability is a very important point. Regarding the MRB, I touch upon the ISO and the other methodology for crediting. So in my view, they look like the same. All of them are good quality. So I think the MRB itself is not a big problem. So if there is a problem on the MRB, transfer of the liability, that is important because the permanency cannot be assured by the private companies. So how to connect with the government responsibility, that is the key of the MRB.
Great. And let me ask you a follow-up on that, which is, I guess, somewhat related, which is, from your standpoint, which economic sectors do you see as sort of leading opportunities for deployment or, in fact, currently leaders in deployment?
Yeah, so the CCU, CCUS, and the DAX are different.
Right.
So the easy one is DAX. So the hard to abate sector is definitely need to have a negative emission. So typical hard to abate sector is aviation. So the international aviation sector are considering the option, the DAX as an option. So already ICAO started the discussion about that this kind of option would be feasible or not under the long-term scenario. So the CCS and the CCU is rather short-term solution. So the typically US, it's the EOR industry already adopted. And also in case of Japan, I come from Tokyo, and I know the situation in Japan well. So in Japan need to use natural gas for many years, even though the increase of renewable. In that case, CCS is one of the options for reduce emission as a transitional energy. So the CCS, CCU, and also CCU, CCU, BEX, and the DAX is different. So the stakeholder or the important industries are different. Just one industry I missed, it's a chemical industry for DAX. Because even though the cost for DAX CCUS is very expensive, but the cost of the carbon and chemical products is not big. So the cost share of the cost is low. So from that point of view, one of the potential industry can use DAX is chemical industry.
Great. So we are in California, and I do want to, as I said at the outset, at least focus a little bit on California. We have here relatively recently a number of policies that have supported the progress of trying to scale up both carbon removal and carbon capture technologies. We have LCFS that has a protocol embedded in it. You referred, I think, earlier, Mike, to the fact that thus far no permanent certifications have been granted, but I think we can expect those to be on the near-term horizon. We have recently passed legislation from 2002 that directs the Air Resources Board to develop a carbon capture, utilization, removal, and sequestration program, CCURS. We keep adding letters to the thing, which is shorthand referred to often as SB 905. There's at least some potential modifications to the state's cap and trade program that, if nothing else, would afford some compliance relief for entities currently covered in that program. But I guess my question for especially you guys in Nora and Mike is that enough? What more do we need to be doing? What has been the effect of those policies thus far? How much further do we need to go? Do we need to stack additional incentives on top of those in order to get to at least the state's goals, which call for pretty significant reductions, 20 million tons in 2030 and 100 in 2045. 2030 is like tomorrow. So what do we need to be doing to build on and to the extent needed to accelerate those policies?
Do you want to start this time? I mean, the answer is California is such a leader in this space and doing, really setting the standard not just for the country but for the world. But also it's never enough at the same time. I think what I would say is that, I think what we're focused on as a newer technology is making sure that SB 905 has the resources to get implemented as quickly as possible, because that's what enables technologies like ours to become part of the LCFS, to become part of these other credit programs. And I'd say in general, too, I think a lot of technologies, like our technology has some significant co-benefits for the state, like, for instance, the fact that we can take wildfire fuel reduction thinnings and use those, which are something that in California, as I know people are well aware, it's a huge problem without a solution right now. And also the fact that we can take orphan wells and plug them is another thing that, reusing that infrastructure. Those are two big problems that we can help solve in California while also sequestering a lot of carbon. And so what we really want is to make sure that companies like ours have access to all of the climate programs. And also because the scoping plan makes it clear that there has to be a significant amount of carbon removal as part of the picture of getting to our goals in California. And so really, the timeline needs to be accelerated so that companies like ours can help us get there.
Great. Yeah, we are a leader in the state. I was pleased to see last year one of the first projects to receive their draft Class 6 permit, their Class 6 injection permit, was a California project, which was great to see. SB 390 or SB 905, excuse me. Great for the state, I think, to have clarity. There is sort of a piece in there that I would love to see changed, which is specifically in regard to the transportation aspect, which basically ties timing for transportation of CO2 approvals to timing of the PHMSA rulemaking at the federal level. And if I talk to my colleagues who are on the more of the regulatory permitting side, it sounds like that is not a firm timeline. That is a long timeline. So I would love to see, if that was on my wish list, that would probably be something I would see change at the legislative level. Also, it's not specifically a CCS issue. And it may be less of an issue, but I also want to flag 1036, SB 1036, some recently proposed California legislation. This is the reincarnation from SB 390 from last year, which would more or less make it illegal, I'm paraphrasing, but would more or less make it illegal to market certain carbon credits in the state of California that do not meet certain standards, right? And those standards are probably less problematic for CCS, admittedly, but still not very well defined. And I've been fielding calls from clients who are saying, we're trying to think about moving our offices out of the state of California because we don't want to be subject to this law. So as someone who moved to the state of California myself 7 years ago, in part because it was a hub for this kind of forward-thinking climate activity, that's sort of a shame to hear. So I know there's a lot of efforts underway to look at SB 1036, and I do hope those continue and are successful.
So maybe let me actually just follow up on what both of you guys said for a second, which is, I think you alluded to it indirectly, but another thing that I would at least flag is, and this has been a theme of our current governor, who's acknowledged that we need to move more quickly on deployment, not solely related to carbon removal projects and carbon capture and sequestration projects, but across the board. It's certainly been a theme that's been echoed, by the policymakers at the state climate and energy agencies. But we do have this dynamic, and I don't know that any of us sitting here necessarily have a solution with regard to just the time it takes to permit projects. And I always sort of think about the example of, in the last decade or so, we in the legislature passed, and the governor, I think Brown at the time, signed legislation that basically created some permitting streamlining with respect to the construction of sports arenas, for example, which we love our sports teams, but I don't know that fits in the category of crisis. I think most people would acknowledge that permitting lower carbon technologies as soon as possible is probably higher priority from a societal standpoint. So long way of asking a question, which is like, how do we grapple with that, and what can we do to sort of start to, address that challenge without getting rid of any of the necessary protections that come with permitting, of course?
Well, I can start, although I'm not a permitting guy, so everyone please correct me once I just get it out of the way. But I think, so permitting is a challenge for all projects, right? So primarily CCS projects, in particular the UIC Class 6 injection well, are federal permits, unless you're in one of the few states that has primacy. And those timelines have been very slow. That's been a big issue for projects, right? At the same time, California is also a state where there are very real local permitting challenges. Latham and Watkins, the only state where we have a land use and permitting practice at the local level is California. And I think that is not a good sign, right? Because that just means it's easier to develop in other states. That being, so there are challenges. There are CEQA challenges. There are all kinds of challenges that go into developing a project in California. That said, a few weeks ago, I noticed that in Texas, in Corpus Christi, Texas, there was a local hearing where they voted down a CCS project, a hydrogen project in particular, right? Which, for people that I work with in Texas, raised a lot of eyebrows. It was a big surprise because, from what I hear, if you're in the oil and gas industry in Texas, you're usually used to getting approved. Ironic that a CCS project or a hydrogen project would not. So I think this is a global. This is not just a California issue. There are challenges for a lot of CCS projects. We saw what happened to the Navigator project in part because of local opposition in Midwestern states. So I think there needs to be a lot of education about CCS projects and CO2 projects. Because right now, companies that thought they would be greeted with open arms as climate forward or climate friendly companies are not being met that way at all.
Do you, Nora, want to, I mean, one, do either you had anything to add, and two, particularly any of your actual CHARMS experience with the issue?
Yeah, what I'd say is that permitting is certainly complicated. Because we're doing small units, we don't have quite the same challenges as some of our colleagues in the industry who are trying to build very large facilities, and I think that can be a really long process. What I'd say is, overall, what I find in California, but also in the US in general, is that there's a challenging tension right now between how fast we need to move for climate and how to be responsible and thoughtful about how to move that fast, right? And I think I think that there's a lot of discussion happening about that in Sacramento right now, because I think that there's a desire to get projects in the ground. So I think that there's a balance around what are the right safeguards, what are the right stop and go points that still make sure that we're protecting people and that there aren't negative impacts, but also make sure that there's a streamlined way to get things done that don't involve, because I think the other challenge when you're a startup is that if you have to go through four different processes for one project, a lot of companies just don't have the resources to do that. So I think the other challenge there is that it then sort of biases towards larger corporations that have a lot more resources being able to scale, and those aren't always the best or even the most economical solutions.
Well, I mean, both of you mentioned it in your comments just now, but I mean, embedded in some of that is sort of this notion that there isn't universal assent that carbon removal, despite the fact that, and carbon capture, despite the fact that, in my opinion, at least virtually every credible analysis indicates it is a technology that is absolutely going to be required if we're going to get where we need to from an emissions reduction standpoint. So how do we start to ameliorate some of those concerns? And maybe this, in some ways, this is a political question as much as it is a technical question, but how do you start to, address some of those headwinds that I think everybody would acknowledge have long been and continue to face, CDR and CCS as technologies?
Yeah, that is really the important point. I am a board member of the International Emission Trading Association, and we, IETA, prepare a kind of the criteria. So the IETA CCS high-level criteria, we call it HLC. That is a global one. So the two components, one is accounting, and the other is sustainability. So the sustainability criteria, one of the essence is a dialogue. So how to understand mutually, that will be the definitely important one. So I think the government and state government and the local government, they are afraid of the negative opinion from the local people. So the technically, I think the CCS is a proven technology. Sequestration is a proven technology. However, public sentiment is important. From that point of view, I think not only the California, but also globally, it's a dialogue between the local community and the project developer that is important. And also the permitting and the permission from the government. At the same time, the government has a responsibility of the long-term reliability. So it is a combination, permission and the take over the liability. So such kind of the legal framework need to be established. So as far as I know, the globally, the country to country, the state to state, the different regulations are there. So a more common approach is very much appreciated for the international project developers.
Yeah, no, those are great points. You guys have any additional comments on how to change the sentiment around the issue?
I mean, I don't have a solution, but it's something I think about all the time. I think my optimistic view on it is that we are a long way away from actually educating people on all the different options for carbon removal. And I think that there are so many different types of technologies that are coming to bear that I think that there are technologies that can be well suited to a variety of different communities. And I also think that there are a lot of additional benefits to many of the technologies besides just the carbon removal part of it. So my instinct has been to really lean into that, to try to explain to people what the value is and what the impact is. For us, we have a small footprint, and we can have these additional benefits for the community. And so far, that's been well received. But that said, I think that we're still in sort of a transition from thinking, no company that's working on carbon removal is ever in a space of saying, oh, we should do this instead of decarbonization. Decarbonization is a priority, right? But we're in a place where we're not going to get there in time, and so we have to scale these technologies now to fill the gap.
Not much to add here. I know that it's a few big years coming up for California climate regulation and legislation generally, with cap and trade authorization, LCFS rulemaking, et cetera. So it'd be great to see some way to make progress in that context, because there definitely is kind of a moment here.
Yeah, okay. Yes, please.
From a scenario analysis point of view, one of the critical point of the particularly DAX is cost. How to reduce the cost of DAX. So for that purpose, the two options are necessary. One is the market itself. So the bigger the market is, the faster the technology innovation. For instance, in the case of DAX, maybe capture cost is down to $100 to $150. It is a very challenging cost, but if such kind of cost will be realized, much faster diffusion is possible. How to reduce the cost? In that case, the bigger market is important. For instance, California, if the Californians produce DAC credit, in that case, it's better to export to the other countries. So more buyers, the bigger market, that will be one of the driver force of the cost down. And also the carbon credit is important, but the carbon credit price cannot cover the full cost. So a kind of the subsidy from the government need to be combined. So technology support, that is important. So from that point of view, the case of US, the IRA is there, but the political uncertainty are there. So it is not good for the investor to the technology. Stable policy, that is important.
So that I was actually, before we maybe open it up for some audience questions, I was actually going to kind of ask each of you a question which you alluded to, Takashi, in your comments just there, which is, what would you tell a policymaker? What is the most important thing that, someone who has the ability to either provide the incentives, develop the policies, what would be the message? What would be the thing or, set of things that they can do or need to do more of or more quickly if we're going to get these technologies deployed at the scale and the pace that we need?
Yeah, actually I'm doing is how to realize a long-term challenging goal. So net zero, easy to say, but how to achieve net zero? From that point of view, several technology options are there. So I explained the pros and cons of each technology. That is another sense, it's an uncertainty. the policy people need to have an obligation to achieve the net zero, but they do not know, unfortunately, they do not know much about the technology uncertainty. So the explain to the uncertainty of technology, I think that is one of the best way to demonstrate the necessity of the renewable technology.
Call me old-fashioned, but I still would love to just see an economy-wide cap-and-trade program that covered everything and had a role for offsets and just be done with it. I think that would be great, but it's not 2010 anymore, and that's not on the horizon. A slightly more realistic one would be primacy. I mean, I don't expect this to happen, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the first post-IRA project to come online was in a state that had primacy at the end of last year. It just, the timeline has been slow for permitting, and it's like you said, it's primarily a deployment issue. You can't deploy. We have a price signal, right? We have 45Q, we have LCFS, we have carbon credits, but you can't deploy if you don't have your permits, if you don't have your approvals. So in a dream scenario would be California to get primacy.
Yeah, I mean, I share the dream of, there being a more, a national compliance market for carbon, but, don't believe that that's realistic. I'd say, in my view, technology neutral or technology agnostic policies that enable access for a variety of technologies to tax credits, like currently technologies like ours and a host of other carbon removal companies are not eligible for 45Q or for LCFS. As we talked about earlier, there is a pathway in California, and we're really excited to see how that develops for more technologies, but I think that acting quickly to make sure that we have as many chances for competition to drive down prices and increase innovation and ensure that the market can scale is very, very critical. And I think that the way to do that is policies that are broader, that welcome in a lot of wide variety of technologies.
Excellent. So before we start moving toward wrap up, I did want to just afford anyone the opportunity to ask questions of the panel, and I believe we have a mic, and so we'll just sort of try to go in order. I think we can maybe just start over that way and work our way through in as much time as we have remaining, if there are.
Thank you for the great presentations. Two-part question. One is, given what we know right now, where do we think we will be on carbon capture storage for the state of California by 2030? So obviously in context of the SB 905 goals. That's part one. Part two, Alberta obviously has a great program for carbon capture, and they have a number of planned facilities to go online by 2025, 2026. Where do you think, if you have any views on how much capacity you think might go online in Alberta over the next few years?
I'll take a crack at it. Just getting out my crystal ball. I think so. Like I said, one of the first draft Class 6 permits at the federal level that was issued was in California. So I would expect we would have at least one major hub operating in California. As far as Alberta, I'm not an Alberta expert, but I know they have a sensible approach to pore space rights issues there, and also the BC, the British Columbia LCFS is a driver of projects. I know I'm not intimately familiar with the rulemaking that they've been doing on that program, but would love to see that continue to provide a price signal like California LCFS could, and so I would expect. I'm not going to throw out a number, but I would fingers crossed that we'll be making real progress, and I think there's reasons to believe that we will.
And I would just add, from my standpoint, there certainly are a number of projects in California that are moving. They're obviously in various stages, but many of them are either in the permitting processes at the Air Board or Region 9 EPA. And there's some, as we've been discussing, certainly some unresolved issues with respect to, I'm glad you mentioned pore space, that continues to be an issue, at least for some of these things, some of these projects. But I think, if we would have been having this conversation a couple years ago, I think the answer would be very different than it would be today, which is, I think it's, given the acknowledgement, notwithstanding the fact, as we've discussed, that there's, by no means universal consensus around these technologies, of the need for it, And my expectation is that continues. We've got, as I mentioned, we've got a 20 million metric ton goal for 2030, and that's real soon. So, I mean, fingers crossed we get that. I don't know.
Hi, David Dunn, Hartree Partners. I know that the carbon capture sequestration protocol for ARB, they have a timeline in there, and in that timeline, they project that you get your permanent certification about the time you get your Class 6 approval. I know that Red Trail has had their, they've had an application pending with ARB for, I think, about 3 years now. Same for an Oxy, which is EOR. Do you have any insight as to why there's so much delay with the permanent certification from ARB? And, is it because they're waiting on 905, or is it because they're maybe disqualifying EOR by default in one case, but that still wouldn't explain the Red Trail application?
I don't, but I don't know if I would assume none of the rest of us do, with respect to those specific ones. Yeah, so just to, David, what David was saying is the signal that's being sent is broader than just with regard to those two particular projects.
But I think it's good that you mentioned Red Trail because I think that's indicative of what this trend I'm seeing, which is that Red Trail recently announced that they're pursuing voluntary carbon offsets, right? So that's a clear case where the failure to get a permanent certification has driven what initially looked like was going to be the driver, LCFS, into carbon offsets. And so there's a lot of implications for that, but that's happening. Yeah.
Ryan Fan, CIBC. Mike, this question's for you. You had a comment early on in this discussion talking about how you're moving on from 45Q and LCFS and see monetization opportunities in the VCM. Can you maybe elaborate on that and why that is and why the demand is pricing VCM as an avenue for monetization for CCS?
Yep. So, well, first, what we were just talking about, the lack of LCFS coming to fruition, lack of permanent certifications being issued is a big driver. I would not say we're moving on from 45Q necessarily. I mean, so tax credits continue to be a big piece of the puzzle, and you don't have a double counting issue there, right? You can get your tax credits, but you can't. But I think the general view is that you can't get both LCFS and voluntary carbon credits because there's a double counting. That's, I think, what the general view people have taken. So actually, to the contrary, with the developments that they've had in IRA, right, around direct pay or transfer, right, I think tax equity is getting easier, and I think we're even starting to see folks talk about almost like a double delivery structure where you're delivering tax credits and you're delivering carbon credits. So that's actually interesting as a transaction structure moving forward. Yeah.
Hi, Doug Huxley with Jacobs Engineering. Thanks to all of the panelists for the effort you put into this. Great information. We appreciate it. Got a deep dive question for Nora. First, I've heard of CHARM, cool technology. I'm curious, are there any practical limits to how far you can transport the biomass, transport the oil, and what's plan B if you don't have an orphan well to store that oil?
Oh, good questions. So in terms of the transportation side of it, we're looking at kind of a mix depending on the feedstock and where we are, but the idea is that we would locate kind of like, especially when it comes to the agricultural side, think of it as like a crew, like a combine harvest crew, where we'll move with after the harvest to take corn stover off the field. On the forestry side, we're still looking at, okay, how far into the forest can we get, right? In a lot of cases, what we'd probably use is like a timber landing zone or something like that to look at the pyrolyzers. And then as far as transporting the oil itself, the oil is very dense, it's viscous, it's sticky. You don't want to touch it, but it's easy to transport for that reason. It's not a pipeline transportation situation, right? So we would truck the pipeline, and then the goal at scale is that we network the sources of biomass with the injection locations. On the backup side, so I guess we actually have a range of options in terms of how to store and sequester the oil. The primary option is looking at orphan wells and particularly reservoirs. We also are currently already injecting in salt caverns. That's another, end of life infrastructure area where also often there's subsidence issues. So it's helpful for us to inject in those caverns because it helps to stabilize the formation. We're also looking at using the bio-oil in the plugging and abandonment process too. So we actually have a lot of different things to do with that oil. I guess the other thing that I didn't mention earlier, because we're kind of focused more on the carbon market side of things, is that the ultimate path for us for the oil is also, we have a parallel R&D path to convert it into a syngas that can be used in iron making. So the ultimate goal is to also be decarbonizing a really hard to decarbonize sector by basically taking that bio-oil and creating a drop-in replacement for natural gas and DRI iron making processes.
There's one in the back there.
Hi, Arpit Soni with C Carbon. First of all, excellent panel. Thank you for the great information. You guys talked about necessary and the right policy infrastructure and signal needed to support some of the up-and-coming carbon capture technology. We also heard LCFS mentioned a few times, and the challenges with permitting and everything. I believe the LCFS, or the Permanence Protocol that was adopted back in 2018-19, have this little provision which allows for any DAC project around anywhere in the world to generate LCFS credits. And this was around the time when the LCFS credits were going at $200 a pop. So at that point, there was policy infrastructure, there was price signal. It's been 5 years. I don't believe there has been a single DAC credit issued under LCFS program. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, what went wrong?
I'm not aware of whether there's any applications on the DAC provisions of the CCS protocol. And I think your question was what went wrong, and I'm just a little clarification in terms of why haven't certifications been granted? I guess I'm trying to, what went wrong in what respect?
I think you hit the nail there. I think there hasn't been any application submitted, despite being what some would call very generous eligibility requirement for DAC projects under LCFS. So I'm curious to hear why there hasn't been uptake on that provision.
Well, in terms of, I would think it would be a question for a project developer in terms of why they may or may not have, submitted an application. What I could say with respect to the LCFS is that it is under, there are amendments under consideration at present, and I believe that those provisions are being looked at right now as part of that, as well as obviously, to your point, one of the key issues has been the price of the LCFS credits, which is, gone down significantly since the heydays of the, credit pushing up against the $200 ceiling. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that piece. Anybody else? Okay, well, final observation from my standpoint. Last year we had a panel on this topic, and I believe the panel was called Boom or Bust. This year it's called Current State and Future Promise. So merely a year later, we're at least more looking forward, hopefully, which is an acknowledgement that there is progress being made. I think a clear theme from everyone here today was we need more, including to the gentleman's last question with respect to the requisite set of incentives and policy drivers, but certainly progress being made on those fronts. And with that, thank you all for your time and very much appreciate everyone coming to listen today.